Hello, everybody, and welcome to a conversation with Cornell West, curated by Moorpark's BSU. The Q&A box is open for questions, and there will be captions for anyone who needs it. This event will be live streamed on YouTube, and the recording of this event will be available at a later date. This is coordinated by President Gerald Richardson III, Pauline Nassar, who is Chief Executive, Corinne McCalla, Director of Public Affairs and Marketing, and me, Trinity Hooper, the Director of Secretarial Affairs and Treasury. This event is sponsored by the Moorpark College Student Equity, Associated Students of Ventura College, Associated Students of Moorpark College, Oxnard College Associated Student Government. And a special thanks is going out to Johnny Conley, Director of Student Equity at Moorpark College, Libby Fada, Student Activity Specialist at Ventura College, Gabby Rodriguez, Student Activity Specialist at Moorpark College, the Black History Month Committee at Moorpark College, Professor Timothy Loomis, Ms. Benia Sumter, Professor Ranford Hopkins, Professor Cynthia Barnett, Professor Tamara Coleman, Professor Patty Coleman, Professor Lawrence Snowden, Micaiah Satterwhite, Dina Pillette, Michael Ashton, and Annalisa Hugan. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Julius Sokenu.
Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. I understand that there's almost 700 or 800 people here this afternoon joining us. This afternoon's conversation with Dr. Cornell West is an opportunity to bear witness to love and justice. Equitable access to higher education facilitates social and economic mobility and fosters corrective justice. We are thoughtful in how we pursue student success by designing an ecosystem that promotes justice. Equity is a way of being, thinking, and acting. We go beyond just identifying data, but by addressing how our practices serve our students, our Black, our Indigenous, our people of color students, our LGBTQ students, and our differently abled students. We go beyond identifying the gaps in hiring faculty and staff and create opportunities to advance and remain in our institutions, opportunities for those individuals to advance and remain in our institutions. Equity and inclusion for us means financial aid for our students, childcare for our students, providing transportation opportunities for our students and our community, meeting the basic needs of our students so that they can achieve academic and career success. Following the brutal murder of George Floyd and the racial reckoning moment that followed, California Community College Chancellor Oakley called us to action. He challenged us to address the national crisis of racism and social inequity. Today's event is a conversation that is student-led and supported by faculty and staff. We will have an honest, open discussion to address race and equity. Dr. West is the oracle we look to as we call out structural barriers to creating an equitable institution and achieving equitable transformation. Dr. West is an elder to help us build the cultural mindset, the shifts that are necessary to continuously reflect and hold ourselves accountable for creating an anti-racist, culturally responsive, and race-conscious campus. Our student organizations at Moorpark, Ventura, and Oxnard College have collaborated today to present this talk with Dr. West. I am inspired by our students, their advocacy, and we are here to learn, to listen, and to get motivated to act, and in so doing, bear witness to love and justice. My colleague, President Sanchez sends his welcome, and he was unable to join us this afternoon because they have a PRT visit going on their campus, but he does send his welcome nevertheless. From Ventura College to express her welcome is Dr. Kim Huffmans.
Thank you, Dr. Sokanu. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And I thank Dr. West and all the presenters that are now enhancing all the wonderful presentations and conversations we've had all month around Black History Month. I also want to point out that our students and our employees deserve a learning environment that is inclusive of equity and free of racism. And that is important work that we're all doing, and why these conversations that we're having today and we've had all month and that will continue are so important. Lastly, I just want to thank our students. We are so blessed and fortunate to have students that are allies and partners in this work, that they really are sharing their voices and their experience to help shape our colleges as we move forward in the future in supporting diversity, equity, and inclusion. So we are very lucky at Ventura, Oxnard, and Moorpark College to have those partnerships and work together for institutional transformation. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here today. And then next, I think, is our trustee from the Ventura County Community College District and our board chair, Josh Chancer.
Hi, good afternoon. On behalf of our elected board of trustees, welcome Dr. West. And I just wanted to say a huge thank you to the students of Oxnard, Ventura, and Moorpark College. You are truly the light of our district. And I'm very proud to hand it off to Ms. McCaw. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. My name is Corinne McCalla. I am the Director of Public Affairs and Marketing of the Moorpark College Black Student Union and also SSCCC Region 6 Vice Chair. I would like to first introduce our co-moderators, Gerald Richardson III, who is the President of the Moorpark College Black Student Union, the Senate Chair for Oxnard College ASD, and the Legislative Affairs Director of SSCCC. Pauline Nassar is the Chief Director of Moorpark College BSU, SSCCC Communications Officer, and Oxnard College Associated Student Senator. Our faculty moderator, who is Tamara Coleman, she is the DEI coordinator on campus. And now, for our legendary keynote, Dr. Cornell West.
Thank you for those very kind and generous words. I want to first say that it is a blessing for me to be here with the precious students in the Ventura County Network. I'm talking about Oxnard College. I'm talking about Ventura College. I'm talking about Moore Park as well. Sister Trinity, I want to thank you so very much. Look forward to our conversations. And of course, I want to salute our distinguished Professor Coleman. I want to salute the captain of the ship, my dear brother, President Sokano. I want to salute my dear sister, who's the captain of another ship. I'm talking about President Hoffman's. And we want to thank Brother Chancellor for his wonderful role in facilitating keeping institutions afloat. And most importantly, I want to thank the Black Student Union for being kind enough to bring me so that I could attempt to say something, to be a force for good, to try to critically challenge our precious students. Now, I want to begin with my own situation as a person, as a human being. That anytime I think of human history, anytime I think of American history, anytime I think of modern history, anytime I think of Black history, it goes back to acknowledging who we are as the person that we are. So I begin with the notion, well, it's more to the notion actually, I begin with the reality. I am who I am because somebody loved me, that somebody cared for me, somebody tended to me. And so I situate myself in a very rich tradition of those who have been willing to attempt to cultivate the best inside of me. And this is very important because anytime you talk about race, you don't begin with name calling and finger pointing. You begin with trying to understand what has gone into the shaping and molding of who we are so that we can accent the best of who we are. Now, I was blessed to have the best father in the world, Clifton West. I'll never be the human being that he was. And I still had the best mother in the world, Irene B. West. There's still an elementary school named after her, Irene B. West Elementary School, right outside of Sacramento, California. And that magnificent West family is intertwined with Shiloh Baptist Church. That's on the chocolate side of Sacramento, California. And I cannot even begin to understand my attempt to engage in truth telling and witness bearing and justice seeking without Irene and Clifton, without Clifton, my blood brothers, Cynthia Sherrill, without Willie P. Cook, without Deacon Hinton, without Sarah Ray. And we were told over and over again, if the kingdom of God is within you, then everywhere you go, you ought to leave a little heaven behind. Now, I know there's a whole lot of heaven being left behind there in Ventura County, especially with the students. But intellectually, that means what? Learning to think for yourself, to cultivate a critical consciousness, and then to allow for an unleashing of a loving soul so that you can leave heaven behind by the thoughts you think, by the deeds you perform, by the community you're a part of. Now, why is this very important in talking about race and talking about Black history? Well, you all know we live in one of the most polarized moments in the history of the country. It's so difficult to stay in contact with, let alone revel in the humanity of other people, be it racial lines, religious lines, sexual orientational lines, gender lines. And the best of the tradition that has gone into me has always said, yes, we acknowledge our roots, R-O-O-T-S. We acknowledge our identity, our Black identity, brown identity, whatever identity it is. But all of those roots and those identities must be grounded in a moral and spiritual integrity that allows us to embrace others with a global solidarity. And so when you talk about Black history, you're not talking about some ghettoized corner in the history of the nation. It's taking you right to the center of any serious and substantive quest for truth and justice. And justice is what love looks like in public. Just like tenderness is what love feels like in private. And every institution of higher learning purports to be involved in a pursuit and quest for truth, for justice, for fairness. And there's no way in which you can talk about truth and justice and fairness without each one of us engaging in a Socratic self-examination. The unexamined life is not worth living. That's Plato. That's line 33a in the Apology. But also a connection of our critical thinking with the suffering of others. Now, we began this afternoon with John Coltrane. John Coltrane is a great wave in an ocean of a people and of a tradition, my tradition of Black people who for 400 years were chronically, systemically hated and yet keep dishing out love warriors like John Coltrane, like Martin Luther King Jr., like Fannie Lou Hamer, like Ella Baker, like Harriet Tubman. I could go on and on and on. Stevie Wonder, love in the need of love. James Baldwin, love forces us to take off the mask we know we cannot live within, but fear we cannot live without. Same people, been terrorized for 400 years, going all the way back when that first slave was put on that barbaric ship on the way to the New World. Our dear brother mentioned Brother Floyd, George Floyd Jr., public lynching, another act of terrorism. But in the face of that terrorism, did Black folk choose to terrorize others? Did Black folk choose to create a Black version of Ku Klux Klan? No. No, Frederick Douglass says, you terrorize us, we want freedom for everybody. That's what it is to be a freedom fighter tied to being a love warrior. That's what Sojourner Truth said. That's what A. Philip Randolph said. That's what Donny Hathaway sang about. That's what Aretha sang about. Love warrior, freedom fighter. Same people, same tradition, traumatized for 400 years. In the face of trauma, what? At our best, choosing to be wounded healers, not wounded hurters. The wounded hurters, that's the worst of our tradition, the worst of any tradition. We come to elevate the best. Something is happening in Ventura County. And that's something that's happening at its best, has to do with human beings of all colors, human beings of all genders, of all sexual orientations, human beings choosing truth, justice, integrity, honesty, decency. And here in February, we say, let us keep track of a people who generated these love warriors and freedom fighters and wounded healers. So we can not just learn something from them, but we can inculcate their vision and their courage inside of us so that we can be better love warriors, freedom fighters, and wounded healers. What a challenge in a moment in which our country is wrestling with such spiritual decay, hatred, contempt, arrogance, hostility, wrestling with such moral decrepitude where people more and more pushing aside the 10 commandments concerned with the 11th commandment. Thou shalt not get caught. I'll do anything in order to be successful. I'll say anything and get away with it. I'll do anything with impunity. That's not just polarization, that's gangsterization. And we're living at a time where gangsterized ways of being in the world becoming more pervasive, where commodification of everybody's for sale, everything's for sale. All we want is just money, status, celebrity, position. How empty in light of the love warriors and freedom fighters and wounded healers that constitute the best of the Black tradition in the midst of the United States that began with its settler colonial project vis-a-vis the land of our precious indigenous brothers and sisters, could enslave Africans, could engage in phony wars against our precious Mexican brothers and sisters, so that California once Mexico, Texas once Mexico, taken away by force. That is the worst of America. There is a best of America. All colors, all genders, all sexual orientations in this country. The people who, out of love and of freedom and a willingness to heal, said, we're going to try to keep alive a fragile experiment in democracy that heeds the anthem of Black people, which is lift every voice. That means the voices on the reservation. Take seriously the stories and visions, the voices in the hood, the voices in the barrio, the voices on the poor side of white, the poor sections of the vanilla side of town. It's a human affair anytime you talk about the best of Black history, or the best of any history, I would argue. So let me stop there. I know I think Sister Trinity, I think it's Sister Trinity or Sister Pauline is going to come, and we'll have dialogue, and we won't worry about the time. We won't worry about the time at all. I go with the Spirit here. And my dear brother, Gerald, looking so sharp with that beautiful smile he got.
So with that, we will now enter our Q&A section, or this deliberative moderated section. I'll pass it on to Pauline.
Thank you, Gerald. And thank you, Dr. Cornell West. I just want to acknowledge Gerald Richardson and I one more time for not only organizing this event, but coming up with the questions for this event. With that being said, the first question is, you've written a lot about what it means to be an intellectual, especially a Black intellectual, but there's so much anti-expert, anti-intellectual sentiment in the US. So what role do you see for intellectuals now in responding to the pandemic and the protests?
What a wonderful question. And again, I salute both of you. And I talk about something's happening in Ventura County. I could just use both of you all as exhibition A, because you're brilliant and sensitive and courageous young folk who's trying to make a difference. The issue of what it means to be an intellectual is a crucial one. I would want to recommend a book by the great Richard Hofstadter called Anti-Intellectualism in America. It was published in 1963. Why is that important? Because he understood that America has always been profoundly anti-intellectual. He understood there's a sense in which the business of America is business. It's been very much about making money. The vocation of being an intellectual is always over against simply making money. Everybody's got to make money. Everybody's got to have some cash flow. But to be an intellectual is to have a certain calling, certain vocation. And that vocation is to invest oneself in the life of the mind and the world of ideas, so that you try to get people to think critically about themselves, about society, about the world. And he draws a very important distinction between intellect and intelligence, because America's always been very much for intelligence when it's tied to making money. We can go from Thomas Edison to Jeff Bezos. These are highly intelligent folk tied to making money. And as I say, there's nothing wrong with making money as long as it doesn't become a fetish or an idol, as long as it doesn't generate an indifference inside of you toward the suffering of others. But the intellectual is he or she who is willing to pay any cost and bear any burden to raise the issues of truth. So like Socrates, he's raising the issues of truth. What happened to Socrates? Oh my God, he got the hemlock. Lord Jesus, raising the issues of truth, makes his way to the temple, runs out the money changers, on his way to the cross. Oh my God, he got a serious price to pay. So that there's always a tension between the calling or vocation of the truth-seeking intellectual, as opposed to the money-seeking businessman or woman who is very suspicious of intellectuals. Another way of putting it is intelligence puts forward immediate evaluation. Intellect evaluates the evaluations. It looks at the deeper assumptions, the deeper presuppositions. And in that way, there's always an in, but not of. James Baldwin talked about the lover's quarrel that intellectuals have with their own country, because they're willing to be critical, to try to make it better. Does that begin to get at what you are after, my dear sister Pauline?
Definitely. Gerald, I will pass it on to you for the second question.
But
That
Brother
was
Gerald,
powerful.
who was that wonderful couple you got behind you there, man?
Those are my parents' old photo.
Ooh, what's that name, man?
Gerald Richardson II and Marcia Richardson.
Gerald and Marcia. That makes you the third?
Yes.
Oh, we need to put that. Oh, you got the third on there. Yeah, you got the third. You showed it. I didn't see that third. I kept looking at that beautiful picture, because that's part of all that love that's gone into the making and shaping of who you are. You know what I mean? I know Paula got her beautiful picture somewhere. I just can't see them. But we can see your beautiful parents. Go right ahead, though.
So I'm curious on your thoughts on color blindness. It's pervasive in education in particular. And we see this idea of professors and people in general having this idea that I don't see color, or that color does not matter. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I just don't believe it. I don't believe it. I think that it's people who say they don't see color, they mean something than what I think you and I are talking about. I think to grow up in America, it's impossible for people to deny that color doesn't operate, race doesn't operate. And when one sees somebody, you just act as if they have no color whatsoever. You see, I think what they really mean is, for so long, to see Black people are meant to associate us with a certain kind of inferiority. And people who say I'm colorblind, what they're saying is, well, I don't associate you with inferiority, but I still see your blackness. Because if somebody looks at me and say they don't see my blackness at all, I say, well, what are you looking at? Some platonic form or Aristotelian essence? I got a body, and my hair is a certain kind of shape, but you can acknowledge it. You see my blackness, but my blackness is on a continuum with humanity, you see. But for me, you see, I think that we have to reject being colorblind, and we have to affirm being love struck. See, I'm a Christian, you see. So when you see folk, you ought to be able to affirm, approve, and even fall in love with the best of them. Fall in love not in an intimate way, but a love of the fact that they're human beings. They have a preciousness, they have a dignity, they have a sanctity. And so that connects you with them. And so if we're love struck rather than colorblind, then we don't have to lie to ourselves and say, I never see color whatsoever. I don't know about that. Then you want to ask them, well, you got a son, you got a daughter? Oh, yes, I do. You didn't notice what color Jamal was when he came home with your daughter? Are you really saying that? I didn't notice what color Jamal was at all. Okay. Hard to believe. You see, so that we have to be able to revel in each other's humanity without claiming that somehow we're not seeing color. Because people's humanity comes in different colors. It comes in different languages. It comes in different genders, different sexual orientations, and so forth. So there's nothing wrong with embracing our particularity, in this case, color, and still being tied to universality, which is to say our humanity. Is that beginning to get at it?
More than you know. That was amazing. Thank you.
No, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Gerald, for asking this question. That is definitely something that needs to be shed light on. So thank you for that. Dr. West, what are your thoughts? As a professor, what do you see as the strength of this generation and things that you give pause to?
Ooh, wonderful question. Well, I appreciate this conversation with you all. You know, it's hard for me to fully grasp the richness of the younger generation. I'm old school, you know, I'm an OG from way back. I'll be almost 70 years old pretty soon. And I spend a lot of time with young people. I insist on teaching freshmen just to be able to stay in contact with young people. But young people are growing up in the most commodified culture in the history of the world, the most market-driven, market-saturated culture in the history of the world. And what are markets about? Markets are about money, they're about profit, they're about manipulation, they're about titillation and stimulation. Whereas what young people are hungry for is that which nourishes their hearts, minds, and souls. Yes, they want to make money. Yes, they want status. But in the end, they also want care. They also want concern. They also want love. They want justice. Those are non-market values. Fidelity. They want trust. Another way of putting it is that I discovered that the younger generation, they're hungry for the real thing. They're tired of fakes and phonies. They're tired of frauds. They're tired of people posing and posturing one way and actually really being something else. See, I would highly recommend the young people listen to some Ashford and Simpson. Nicholas Ashford, Valerie Simpson had that song, Ain't Nothing Like the Real Thing. And what is the real thing? The real thing is beneath all the superficiality. You see, you're not going to fake the funk. Now, young folk don't want to fake the funk. They want the real thing. And the real thing is the love, the friendship, the struggling with truth, the struggling with justice, the struggling with fairness, even when we're wrong. All of us as human beings will be wrong at some point. But you have to say what you mean. You got to mean what you say. That's the real thing. That to me is something that young folk are hungry for. Would you all agree or disagree with that formulation?
Agree, 100%.
It does make sense to both of you?
Definitely.
No, that's good. That's good. That's good. That's good.
I'm curious, as a political philosopher, I'm curious your thoughts on this. As you know, we are in California, and Proposition 16, which was affirmative action, it actually failed in California. The voters did not vote for it. So I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on affirmative action policies? Are they effective? Or what do you think of race-conscious policies that establish equity? What would be your ideal policy?
Well, one is, I've been fighting my dear brother, Ward Connolly. He and I are from the same city. I'm from Sacramento. He's from Sacramento. And he and I have been clashing on this for a long, long, long time. I love my brother. I'm a Christian. I try to love everybody. But at the same time, I've got some political foes. And I can stay in contact with the humanity of my foes and still have deep disagreement. But there's no doubt that affirmative action is something that not only has played a fundamental role, I wouldn't even be where I am without affirmative action, because the racism, and I would add sexism too, was cut so deep all the way up until the 1970s and 80s when affirmative action began to have some impact. Now, affirmative action, unfortunately, doesn't connect with our precious poor brothers and sisters. It doesn't affect as many working class brothers and sisters. It's much more middle class affair for those who have education. It's only 31% of folk in America who even go to college, right? So you got 68, 69% don't go at all. And so affirmative action, especially in higher education, has been confined to a certain group. But affirmative action is very important. Why? Because there's still institutional racism in the country. There's still individual racism in the country. And people have to be accountable when they're engaged in judgments based on those kinds of racist biases. And so all affirmative action was saying is, we've got a certain pool of qualified people. And for so long, there's been Black people who are qualified, but never given a chance. So once you meet those minimal qualifications, for faculty, staff, student, or whatsoever, then everybody in that pool ought to be taken seriously. And you ought to be conscious about the fact that 244 years of racist slavery, almost 100 years of racist neo-slavery called Jim and Jane Crow, and those effects and consequences are still at work, both in our structures as well as in our minds. So all affirmative action was saying is we have to be conscious of that. And the same would be true with women, given the ugly patriarchal practices that have been going on for so long, you see. So in that sense, I think that it's sad that the state of California rejected that. There's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of disinformation out there. And this is the second time California's done that. People think of California so progressive and so liberal and so forth. You say, well, it depends on what the issue is. You see, Mississippi, well, we understand. Well, Mississippi got some progressive folk too, but not like California on certain issues. But when it comes to affirmative action voting, well, California's still, I would say California's still behind. But I mean, it's a complex issue. And you can imagine, debating with Ward and the others, they've got their reasons in terms of liberties. They've got their reasons in terms of low expectations. And we never want to have low expectations of anybody, especially Black students, especially brown students. But at the same time, I think you have to make sure you have countervailing forces against the institutional and personal racism that is still very much operative, not just in Ventura County. It's operative at Harvard University. It's operative at Yale. It's operative at Princeton. It's operative at University of Chicago. It's operative at University of New Mexico. It's across the country. It's not just California. It is a domestic, national issue.
Thank you, Brother West. Just a follow-up question. Do you think there are other effective race-conscious policies that California could possibly introduce?
That's a good question. No, I mean, I think there's ways of trying to gain access to highly talented Black and brown and indigenous and Asian brothers and sisters. But you have to be creative about it. You've got to be creative about it. So that, for example, we always have a group of white brothers and sisters, or vanilla brothers and sisters, who are committed to fairness, who are committed to justice. And there's ways in which through their networks, they can still bring in some high quality Black and brown and indigenous peoples. You see what I mean? They just have to be courageous in how they go about doing it. You see, that's the key. That's the key.
Definitely.
Indeed, indeed.
We'll go on to the next question. Thank you, Dr. West.
Mm-hmm.
How has your view of civil rights changed over the years? How has the dialogue about critical social issues changed over the years?
Ooh, that's a good one now. Well, I was blessed, to grow up in Sacramento, California, at a time in which Martin Luther King Jr. was still alive. I saw him speak at Memorial Auditorium, downtown Sacramento. When he was shot down in Memphis on the porch there at Lorraine Hotel, I was in student body president, Kennedy High. We organized student body presidents throughout the city. We shut down the city with a student strike until they had Black studies in those high schools. Right? Now, at that time, civil rights had to do with not just voting, not just access to suburbs that had been discriminating against Black people, but it also was spilling over into what Malcolm X called human rights. And so we began to talk about the right to food, the right to shelter, the right to a job with a living wage, and then the right to health care. That's why I spent so much time with my dear brother, Bernie Sanders, right? He was saying health care is a right. It doesn't have to be mediated by the market in terms of what kind of job you have. If you lose your job, you lose your health care and so forth. And millions of Americans don't have health care in the richest nation in the history of the world. No, there ought to be a right to health care. Just like there's a right to water. You see, you got to decommodify it. You know, it's not a matter of just having money in order to have health care or having a job just to have health care. So in that sense, human rights is really the starting point for me. And it has been ever since I was 14 years old. I mean, it's very interesting how people still call me a civil rights activist because I've been a human rights activist all my life. Right? I'm concerned about human rights of my brothers and sisters in Pakistan, in Libya, in Somalia, vis-a-vis US drones. I'm concerned about the human rights of my Jewish brothers and sisters in Russia, my Palestinian brothers and sisters under Israeli occupation. I'm concerned about the human rights in Tibet and Kashmir and so forth. I try to be morally consistent, get you in a lot of trouble. That's all right. Nothing's going to stand in the way of my love for oppressed people wherever they are in the world. No matter how unpopular it is, that's all right with me. I'm a Christian. I'm following a very unpopular Palestinian Jew named Jesus. And if he was around, he would say, the Palestinians, the Israelis, the Ethiopians, the Russians, all of them have equal value. And when they are suffering, I'm going to raise my voice, no matter what. But it's got to have that moral and spiritual integrity to it, you see? And in that sense, I think it's interesting when they say, well, you're a civil rights activist. What they're really saying is, and it's a compliment, they're saying, we know you a Black man. Everybody calls my civil rights must be Black. Well, no, you got a lot of white civil rights activists. They don't call them civil rights activists. They think about Martin King. Now, that's a compliment for me, right? Because Martin King is one of the great figures, you see. But was Martin King only a civil rights activist? No, he said a baby in Vietnam has the same value as a baby in America. That's beyond civil rights. He's talking about US imperial policy in Asia. And he called it that, but they still call him civil rights activist. Malcolm X, civil rights activist. No, he said he's a human rights activist, right? Coming out of the rich Muslim tradition with all of the prophetic possibilities of the Muslim tradition. Just like the Judaic tradition, prophetic possibilities out of Judaism. Just like my own Christian tradition, prophetic possibilities out of the Christian tradition. But each one of those traditions also have a whole lot of challenges. Judaism, Christianity, Islam, oftentimes they're too patriarchal. Oftentimes they're too homophobic. Oftentimes they're too tribal. They're only concerned about just a small slice of humanity and not human beings across the board. You see what I mean? So each one of those traditions has struggles within them. And that's the way it's always been. I think that's probably the way it will always be.
Thank you for that. And thank you for bringing light. I got very excited when you started talking about the Israeli and Palestinian conflict, because I don't think a lot of people bring light to that issue. So I have a follow-up question for that. How have your politics around global issues made you controversial?
Oh, I'm just controversial from the very beginning. When we had that strike when I was 14 years old, They said, Brother West, you pull off this strike, you never gonna get into college because they gonna keep track of you. Well, he's applying to college and he'd already shut the city down with the student strike. I said, well, that's just gonna have to be what it is. You see, then we had struggles around Latin America, El Salvador. We had struggles around Honduras. When I went to New York City, and I encountered one of the great public intellectuals of the 20th century named Edward Said. And he and I used to go down to the New York Times and say, you should use the word occupation rather than disputed territories. The occupation was in the making. This was way back in the 70s and the 80s. But it was based on the same kind of moral and spiritual willingness. And I think part of the problem, the reason why it is difficult to have a serious and respectful conversation about our precious Jewish Israeli brothers and sisters and precious Palestinian brothers and sisters, because it's been a taboo issue. See, people don't want to touch it. And you have to be able to confront taboo issues. So you got a lot of people who want to talk about every issue but that issue. And you say, well, wait a minute now. We got to be consistent. You got to stay in contact with humanity, the Jewish brothers and sisters. You got to stay in contact with humanity, Palestinian brothers and sisters. And I say over and over again, if there were a Palestinian occupation of precious Jewish brothers and sisters, there would be a major conversation in the country. You see? And I would be just as upset. I'd be with my Jewish brothers and sisters. Palestinian brothers and sisters, quit occupying the Jewish brothers and sisters on moral and spiritual grounds. Now it's the opposite. Now you got Israeli occupation. I'll say exactly the same thing. How come? Because I love both of them. Both of them are human beings. And if both of them are dominating anybody, we've got to call it into question. Just like me and Gerald. If we were part of a Black supremacist country, if Black people had treated white people the way white people have treated Black people, we would be in solidarity with the white brothers and sisters. We don't want to be associated with Black dominators just because we Black. Domination is wrong, no matter who does it, right? But that's not the case. We don't live in a Black supremacist civilization. We live in a civilization shaped by white supremacy. And so based on the same moral and spiritual grounds, we're in solidarity with those folks. And of course, we got, the history of Black gangsters and Black thugs everywhere, because every community got gangsters and thugs. You got Jewish thugs, you got Palestinian thugs. And we got to be against thuggery across the board, right? Why? Because we're committed to what is right, what is moral, and what is just. And what is right and moral and just is never a function of just race, gender, sexual orientation, nation. Every identity must be grounded in a moral and spiritual integrity and a global solidarity. That's the key. But for so long in the United States, Black folk rendered invisible, just like Palestinians for so long have been rendered invisible. Their suffering invisible. Black suffering invisible. And we could say that of other groups as well.
Thank you for that.
Thank you. For sure. What are your thoughts about the recent insurrection?
Oh, you mean some of our sick, more thuggish white brothers and sisters who took over the Capitol the other day?
Yep.
Well, one is that, we have a long history of vigilante activity on behalf of, enacted by white supremacist militia groups. Many of us, have our own names on their list in terms of who they want to hunt down. Now the groups are about 900 of them. I saw the same thing when I was in Charlottesville, 2017. You had the neo-Nazis and the Klan, real spiritually sick white brothers, some sisters, some white sisters, mainly white brothers who were coming at us tooth and nail. What has happened under Trump, it has become more, they feel more emboldened. So it spills over now in the public. They've always been there, very much so. And part of the progress of the country is to try to cut back on the white supremacist sensibilities and mentalities in the country. And there has been some progress on that. You know, you go back 50, 60 years ago, a lot of those same folk who stormed the Capitol, you know, they were running states, they were governors, they were running committees in Congress, they were senators, you see. So there's been some attempt to push it back, but anytime you attempt to push it back, what do you get? A backlash. And we've seen the backlash against any perceived progress on behalf of Black people and brown people and others. And since 65, we had such a racist and white supremacist immigration policy that was enacted in 1924, pushed by deeply conservative folk, including the Klan. At 1924 to 65, it was mainly just white brothers and sisters from Europe who gained access. After 65 now, large numbers of brothers and sisters from Asia, Middle East, Africa start coming in the country. There's these beautiful folk from Nigeria, Ethiopia, Uganda, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Singapore. The folk from the Middle East come marching in from Persia and Iran and so forth. Oh, everybody get nervous. Oh, well, we've always believed in immigration, but we didn't really have in mind these particular immigrants. I don't know why they can't be more vanilla. I have a commitment to immigration in America, but I just discovered that it's not as deep as I thought because these particular immigrants, they make me uncomfortable. Oh, really? And then, of course, as a Black man, I say, well, how long you been in the country? Well, my grandmother came. Oh, so you haven't been here that long. What makes you the definitive authority on defining what is American? You just got here. I've been here 12 generations. And I embrace them. Isn't that interesting? Oh, then we got a struggle going on, right? Serious struggle going on. And so part of what happened on January 6th was that you get this backlash, deeply xenophobic. You know, it's anti-Black, it's anti-brown, deeply anti-Jewish. Nazi presence there. Deeply anti-gay and lesbian and trans and non-binary. Deeply homophobic, you see. I mean, I think those are salient issues. There are some economic issues as well that's worth noting, namely that some of the folk there are suffering economically, but instead of organizing to confront the most powerful, they'd rather scapegoat the most vulnerable. You see. So when in fact it looks like their jobs are precarious, they don't confront the bosses, they confront our precious Mexican brothers and sisters in California, for example. And the Mexican brothers and sisters say, we're not running nothing. We don't have power to shape the destiny of your situation. Yes, there'll be some competition when we get here, but there's powers in high places that's creating the very context. Why don't you confront them? Oh, cowardly and not enough vision. And that's true for Americans, whatever color they are, because you got a number of Black folk who also have anti-immigrant sensibilities against our precious Mexican brothers and sisters, because they also accept the mainstream perception rather than get beneath the mainstream perception. That's what truth is. Truth is always beneath the superficial dialogue. Always beneath. Listen to the Republican Party, listen to the Democratic Party. Do you think either of them are telling the full truth? No, you got to get beneath. Back when we talked about the vocation of intellectual. You look at the basic assumptions and presuppositions. You evaluate the evaluations. You evaluate the framework that people are trying to put us in. We got to expand the framework. I'll give you one example. Martin Luther King Jr. was trying to break the back of American apartheid. And he would have these negotiations, you know, with a number of the white elites in Alabama. And they would say, well, you know, Reverend King, we think there ought to be a liberal version of Jim Crow. What that would be is, well, we're still going to have Jim Crow, we're still going to have segregation, but we'll allow some spaces for the Black middle class to have some opportunities. And he said, no, I'm an abolitionist. I want to get beneath these superficial options. I want to abolish Jim Crow. I don't want a liberal version of Jim Crow. That's like a liberal version of slavery. Well, there'll be some slaveholders who will treat some of the slaves very nicely and kindly on the weekend. No, we want to abolish slavery. We don't want a liberal version of slavery. Well, so it is with poverty for me. So it is with a number of issues. I want to abolish poverty across the board. I want to abolish decrepit schools. I want to abolish student debt. We got to do away with some of this stuff. You see, and they say, oh, you're so radical. You don't say. You don't say. That's exactly right. Why? Because radical means get to the root. And when you get to the root, you're going to get beneath the superficial discourse. I want to abolish patriarchy. Oh, Brother West, you're going too far. I think we ought to have a moderate version of patriarchy. No. Women's humanity, women's potentiality ought to be unleashed across the board. I want to abolish homophobia. You a dreamer, that's right. You got the right brother. I'm a freedom dreamer. I'm a love dreamer. I'm a healing dreamer. And will go down faithful to that dream before the worms get my body.
Gerald, did you want to ask a? Oh. So I have the next question. The Central Park Karen had criminal charges of making a false report dropped in New York City. Talk to us about how the legal system has different standards for whites and people of color.
Yeah, well, one, I've been blessed to teach in prisons since 1977. And it has been a beautiful, joyful experience. Some of the most brilliant folk I've ever met have been behind bars. I've had a student get a PhD, became professor of philosophy at Pace University, Brother Anthony Edwards. He died just recently, coming right out of jail. And I've seen it go from 2,000 people in jail to over 2 million. I've seen the expansion of the mass incarceration regime. Why? Because Black folk, brown folk have roughly the same percentage of folk involved in drug activities, right? But they're over 60-some% of the convictions. See, that's racism at its very deep level. You see, but it's not just racism, but it's also class. It's also class. So we're talking about poor and working class Black people. Poor and working class brown people. It's also poor and working class white people, but disproportionately Black and brown. You see. And the best example there, of course, is 2008. You got massive Wall Street crimes, insider trading, market manipulation, predatory lending, fraudulent activities. How many Wall Street executives went to jail? Zero. My dear brother Obama, he met with them March of 2009. What did he say? He says, I stand between you and the pitchforks that the people have coming at you, but I will protect you. I will be on your side. He sided with Wall Street. He bailed out Wall Street. He didn't bail out Main Street. And he and Eric Holder as his attorney general, who himself comes out of Wall Street, both of them Black, but siding with Wall Street. And hence I was very critical of them based on moral and spiritual grounds, because it shows that Wall Street can engage in crimes and there's no responsibility. But you get Precious Jamal and Letitia committing a crime and they go straight to jail. You get Jose and Juanita committing, they go straight to jail. So that's both racist and classist. And that needs to be called into question. We must have a fair rule of law across the board. And so these are examples of the ways in which We have to be vigilant with our voices. We have to be vigilant with our bodies. That's why some of us hit the streets. Some of us go to jail. And in the end, some of us must be willing to die for what we believe. This is why I tell young people all the time, don't think of yourself as first and foremost having a brand. Think of yourself as first and foremost having a cause. Now, you can use your brand for your cause. You can use your market for justice. You can use your job, your career for something bigger than you. But if all you got is a brand, then you've already sold your soul for a mess of pottage. Because the Black freedom tradition did not engage in sacrifice just for Black folk to have brands. We came from Africa and we were branded. The brand on our bodies. We must use our success for moral and spiritual greatness. And moral and spiritual greatness has to do with the quality of service to others. I believe in the biblical definition of greatest. He or she is greatest among you will serve you. Whatever your gifts are. If you can sing like Aretha, she's gonna render those gifts in such a way that she touches your soul. You're a doctor like Charles Drew, he's gonna heal in such a way that the angels sing. You're a pharmacist, you're a sanitation worker. You're there to serve. If you're a student in Ventura County, all the brilliance, all your sharpness, you still want to use that to what? Help somebody. To be of service to somebody. That's a cause. That's not just a brain. And that's something that needs to be said over and over again in this society. And of course, so many young folk like yourself, you all understand what I'm talking about. You wouldn't be members of the Black Student Association. You wouldn't be members of the student groups that's trying to be a force for good, bigger than your own egos, bigger than your own careers. You got callings, not just careers.
You are just brilliant. I just have one final question, and then Pauline will take us into our Q&A. So recently, we've seen how your moral and spiritual grounding and just activism has caused you to get in a little bit of trouble, some good trouble though. So my question is, on your journey of heightened awareness and the dismantling of racism and the fight for human rights, how do you find the tenacity to keep up the good fight? What inspires you and what motivates you to keep fighting for people like us?
Well, I mean, one is, I told you about Cliff and Irene. You see, if people had a chance to meet my father, you could see how far I fall short. I could never be the human being he was. He died in 1994. He's overlooking me all the time. You know what I mean? He set such high standards. The world doesn't know that much about him. I know. The world might think a whole lot about me. I said, if you met Dad, you better put me in context. You better put me in context. And so that to be the second son of Clifton and Irene is the greatest honor I've ever had. So I know what the standards are. The same is true to come out of Shiloh Baptist Church. So by the time you get to Martin Luther King Jr., well, he's like Dad, and Dad's like him. He set a standard. Now, all of these are human beings. What does that mean? They got faults. They got foibles. Dad wasn't perfect. But the basic orientation of his mind, heart, and soul and body was to treat people right, to have integrity, to have honesty, to have a sensitivity to suffering of others, no matter who they are, and a generosity to others, you see. And as long as I have memories of that, as long as I know what the standards are, I'm willing to pay whatever price it is, with a smile too. Now, with a little style, not as much style as both of y'all. Both of y'all got a whole lot of style. I'm trying to catch up on the style front, but certainly with a smile, because we start with gratitude. Life is a gift. Struggle is a gift. Sanity is a gift. And we have to be willing to pay back with that gift. Our very service is a form of giving. And in the end, your life is a gift. So that when you think of the gift character and the gift quality of our lives, then you have gratitude as well as sometimes some attitude. Attitude in the sense of, don't mess with me because I don't put up with disrespect. I'm a son of Clifton and Irene. Y'all may not understand what that means, but I know what it means. You see, I don't play no games when it comes to Cliff and Irene because they stand too tall. And I see the same thing in your precious parents right there behind you. Same commitment to dignity. Sister Pauline, she got the same thing, even though she ain't got the pictures of her parents in the back. We can still see them. We can still see them. That love that they put inside of both of you all, for you to be the most excellent ones, the morally and spiritually great ones. That is a magnificent gift. We must never, ever, ever forget it and never allow the world to take away that joy and that memory. Never allow the world to take that away.
Thank you, Dr. West. I just have one more question, and then we will go into the Q&A. Your situation at Harvard. Why do you think you have not been tenured?
Well, you know, there could only be three reasons. One is because I'm too old, and I am getting older. There's no doubt about that, but I still got a lot of energy. But there's been other professors who underwent tenure process and received tenure who older than me. So I figured it couldn't be age for the most part. Some people say, well, his best works are behind him. Well, I've got the Gifford Lectures. This is a very prestigious set of lectures in Edinburgh, Scotland. People even say the Gifford Lectures are kind of Nobel Prize in philosophy. So that committee invites me to give the Gifford Lectures 3 years from now. They're saying, we think Brother West still has something to say. It can't be that everything that I will contribute is behind me. So it can't be age. It can't be academics, because if I got, 22 books, I got tenure 37 years ago at Yale, university professor at Harvard, university professor at Princeton. What is a university professor? The highest honor for a faculty member. So it couldn't be academics. So it had to be politics. It had to be politics. And I don't think my support of my dear brother Bernie Sanders upsets the powers that be at Harvard. Now, Bernie, he could be viewed as a radical brother, but he's still part of a kind of mainstream within the Democratic Party. See, so what other issues could it be? Well, this is where I zero in on the Israeli-Palestinian issue, that I'm thoroughly convinced that it is precisely my outspokenness against the mainstream that deeply upsets a Harvard administration who would have to give their stamp of approval on someone who is so critical of the Israeli occupation and actually supports the boycott and divestment and sanctions movement. And once you support that movement, you are usually cast as being an anti-Jewish or anti-Semitic person. And I say, you can call me any name I want, you want, but I'm never going to stoop as low as to hate Jews. I'm never going to stoop as low to hate any group, but I do hate injustice. And any group that promotes or perpetuates injustice will receive my moral critique and my witness, and I'll be in solidarity with the folk who are suffering. And so just an attempt to try to think of what could be the reasons, what are the grounds of the reasons, that's my conclusion.
Do you ever regret having these political stances because of the repercussions that you're getting?
No, not at all. No, not at all. Definitely. Not at all.
Just know if you need me in Cambridge, I'll be right there with you.
Well, no. You and Sister Pauline, you all have some magnificent work still to do there in Ventura. So I can feel your support and solidarity across the nation. But you all stay on work that you're doing. You know what I mean? That's what I should be saying is any way I can be supportive. I'm going to give you all my phone number, but any way I can be supportive, you let me know, because it's very important that the younger generation be connected to the struggles for integrity and honesty, struggles for love and justice.
Right. So we have a question from Adam in the Q&A. Over the summer, we have seen the movement to defund the police become relatively mainstream. What do you think of this movement? Do you think that the police and prisons are obsolete? What does the phrase from Michelle Alexander, reimagine justice, mean to you?
Wonderful question. Michelle Alexander, she's my dear sister. She teaches at the Great Union Theological Seminary in New York. I've spent so much time, we'll probably end up going back there, I think. That one, we got to start at the top. There's already been massive defunding of the police in terms of the institution that's supposed to police Wall Street. They call it deregulation, defund it. Take the money out of it, Wall Street runs free. No regulation, no policing. So that from the very beginning, we had to always put it within the larger framework. There has been a defunding of the police of the Pentagon. You see, Pentagon gets big money. Who's going to police the Pentagon? Hardly anybody. They don't have no money. They do what they want, just like Wall Street, do what they want. It only becomes the issue of defunding the police when you talk about poor people, Black people. You see, why? Because the attempt of the police when it comes to poor people to contain and suppress too often. But this is not true across the board. I heard actually the mayor and the police chief in Ventura back this summer. I think his LeVere was his name, Brother Matt, was LeVere and the police. And they were talking about how they have to be committed to treating Black and brown people with humanity. I agree wholeheartedly. But it's going to be a matter of ensuring that the police themselves are accountable. The Wall Street elites haven't been accountable. They got away with it, you see. The police doing wonderful things, we applaud. The police doing negative things, you don't just come out and say, we're sorry they're doing it. You say, they must be accountable. If the police killing people, they need to have a fair trial and go to jail. How many policemen actually go to jail given all these folk who get killed? Hardly anybody. It means they're not serious about accountability. See what I mean? And you have to say that. And when you say it, what will they say? Oh, why you hate the police? I don't hate the police. I hate the police killing folk. I hate the police brutalizing. I hate to see the police get killed. I hate to see the police get brutalized, but I'm against brutalization across the board. And trying to be consistent means you get them misunderstood. Because oftentimes people want to protect one group and they don't want the other group to be accountable. You see? So that defunding the police simply means having a system of law enforcement where you treat Black and brown people with respect, and when you don't, you are accountable. You have to pay consequences in the same way that any other citizen who brutalizes other people has to be accountable, you see. I'm sorry, that's a long answer, but we have to keep the larger context in mind because, you know, it's just going on for so long. I mean, I don't know of a Black man in America who hasn't had a negative and ugly encounter with the police. I've had so many I can't even count. I mean, and it's just a reality. My brother, my father, my son, my grandson, across the board. And people want to act as if, well, you just got to get used to it. You want to normalize it. No. Because when it happens to somebody else, you see, it can become a major crisis. You see. But when it happens to Black folk, we're supposed to get used to it. No way. No, I know you got some other questions that I'm sorry to go on.
Thank you for, I think a lot of people needed to hear the comment about you saying, I don't know sorry, I'm trying to read my thoughts. I don't know any Black man that hasn't gone through police brutality. And I'm so, so glad you said that. So thank you for that. I'd just like to mention one more thing. We have an overflow of questions. We will not be able to get to a lot of them, but we will choose a few. So given that, we have a question from Dina. I am a Puerto Rican gay woman who wants to love out loud. Sometimes it gets me in trouble. What advice do you have for me?
Ooh, one is you want to be in contact with that rich tradition of Puerto Rican brothers and sisters. Julia Borges, one of the greatest poets of the 20th century. And she was wrestling with her forms of sexuality, but she was also a love warrior and a freedom fighter and a wounded healer. She died there in Harlem. But what you want is you always want to be connected with voices of the dead that come through books or internet, voices of the quick, voices of those who are alive that you can still hear, you see. And the Puerto Rican tradition, especially that Puerto Rican tradition that radically calls into question U.S. colonialism, going all the way back to Abisos Campos and Lolita Lebron and the music of Hernandez. And I mean, the Puerto Rican culture is a hybrid culture, of course. It's indigenous peoples, it's African peoples, it's European peoples, all mixed together in blood and culture and so forth. So you want to use that as wind at your back. In the same way what I was talking about, Donny Hathaway and Curtis Mayfield and Aretha Franklin and John Coltrane and Sarah Vaughan. I mean, that's my particular culture that keeps me on the right track. It allows me to preserve my sanity. Because living in America as a Black man, you could go crazy. But it also preserves my dignity and my generosity. Coltrane, you're blowing a love supreme. That's not just a song. That's a way of life. How you do it, Coltrane? Because I had my mother, I had my father, I had Monk and the others keeping me on the right track. Clifford Brown and Mary Lou Williams, that was my community. And he had an AME Zion church. His grandfather was a great pastor. He had all of those folk inside of him. Sister Pauline, you got the same kind of love inside of you coming out of your respective tradition. Brother Gerald, you got similar love coming out of you, out of your respective tradition. You got to hold on to that. See, because so much of the world is trying to tease that out of you. So you end up not tied to freedom, not tied to love, not tied to healing. And most importantly, they want to make you scared. You see, they want to keep you afraid. And the Puerto Rican tradition has always said, the great one said, I'd rather be dead than afraid. Or it's Mary Ellen Pleasant, the Black sister who was there in San Francisco, first multi-millionaire in the Black community. Madam Walker was number 2. She was the first one because she married a white brother who was a robber baron. He dropped dead, so she got all of his money. And she became the founder of human rights in California in terms of generating all of these different centers and so on. She gave John Brown, a white brother who died for Black people, she gave him $900,000 in 1858. And that's something the year before he attacked Harper's Square. And what did she used to say? She started every speech, I'd rather be a corpse than a coward. That's heavy. Everybody doesn't have to follow that, but you know what the standard is. You see, stay away from cowardliness. Stay away from being afraid. And that doesn't mean you want to be a corpse quick, but it means you're not going to fall into being scared and afraid. You see, that's the crucial thing, because as long as we're afraid and scared, people don't want to get in good trouble, as Brother John Lewis said.
Beautifully said. With that, I will pass it on to Corinne McCalla. So she has some questions from the live audience.
Hello. This is a question from Matthew Morris. He asked, How do we hold our academic institutions accountable for the negligent atmosphere that has led to so many spiritual and mental deaths of Black men and women? How do you know when they have had enough, since these institutions don't already have a clear picture of when the goals of equitable treatment is meant to heal our campus and student body?
Oh, that's a heavy one, my dear Sister Corrine. And I know Sister Trinity also has got her powerful views on this. We all in it together. But I come back to this issue of accountability. But the accountability is the level of students, at the level of staff, I'm talking about the labor force, and the level of administration, faculty, and all the way up to president. Now, how do we keep each other accountable so that we all are committed to treating each other decently and with respect? Because you're so right. There's been so many casualties. So many casualties. If I was not a strong, free Black man, I'd be a casualty right now. See? But I don't worry about it because I got my armor together. You see, I'm ever ready. I'm never surprised at evil. I'm never paralyzed by despair. I'm a blues man. Blues man can take any catastrophe with style and a smile and keep on moving. Doesn't mean you're not wounded. Doesn't mean you're not scarred. Doesn't mean you're not torn, but you just keep on moving. Curtis Mayfield said what? Keep on pushing. Keep on pushing with your eyes toward the standards of excellence. You see, but I've been blessed in a certain way, and you are so right. That's what your question is so heartfelt for all of us, no matter what color we are. The last thing we want in Ventura County is folk falling through the cracks. Precious students falling through the cracks. Now, of course, we don't care what color, but so often it's disproportionately our precious Black brothers and sisters, brown brothers and sisters, and so forth, you see. And we've got to keep the pressure on. The accountability takes the form of pressure, intellectual pressure, moral pressure, spiritual pressure, and institutional pressure. Does that begin to get at that question, you think, Sister Corrine? Or do you have that mute on? Do you have the mute?
I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, no, there it is. No, absolutely, absolutely.
The next question is, how can we move our nation towards representation that includes a broader range of values?
Well, it's got to be by example. It's got to be by example. We have to try to be the kind of persons that we talk about and calling for. And see, what happens is it's the great examples that generates the possibilities of awakening. That's the key. That's the real key. If you see people who exemplify a level of vision and integrity and love and justice, and you decide that's how I want to be, and you get enough people like that, you can have an awakening that's broad. It's just like religion, right? People see Muhammad, you see Jesus, you see Esther, Amos, you say, Lord, they got something to say, and they're examples that I want to imitate. You see, or you see Malcolm X, you see Martin King, you see Fannie Lou Hamer, you see Edward Said. I want to be like, you see Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, right? Overflowing with love and justice, like the Baal Shem Tov, one of the great figures in Judaism, overflowing with love. You say, oh, I want to be like that. And if enough people make that decision, then you got an awakening and a movement. We saw it with Brother Floyd Jr., right? We're not going to put up with public lynchings of precious Black brothers, and we're going to hit the street. How come? Because we're following the opposite of that. We don't want to be like the police who did that. We don't want to be like the institutional racism that's allowed for that. And who are the counterexamples for that? Well, you got a whole slew of possibilities. And they come in all colors. I want to be like Cesar Chavez. I want to be, you see what I mean? Goes on and I want to be like Grace Boggs. I want to be like Dorothy Day. All of these people ought to be household names. Why? Because they exemplify love and justice. People need to know who they are. You see? Now you hear Stevie Wonder is the greatest love warrior in music in his generation. What does he think about doing right now? Y'all know about that? Well, he's thinking about moving to Ghana forever. He said he can't take the white supremacy in America no more. He can't take his kids being disrespected. Stevie Wonder, who wrote Love in Need of Love. Stevie Wonder, who wrote some of the most beautiful love songs of the 20th century. You see? You say, oh, Stevie, you feel the same thing I'm feeling? And of course, he's thinking about going to Ghana like who? W.B. Du Bois. The great Du Bois. Didn't he leave the country? He went to Ghana. He said, I'm never coming back. I can't take this disrespect. That's W.B. Du Bois, the first PhD at Harvard University, 1895. He went to Ghana. Now Stevie thinking about going to Ghana. And you say to yourself, my God, we know it's been out of control. We've got to be more fortified. We got to be willing to fight even more. And if the Black brothers are feeling that way, we know how so many Black sisters must be feeling. Because they got to deal with sexism and patriarchy too. The same would be true with the Black gays and lesbians and so forth. But all of us can't go to Ghana. I mean, I know I'm not going to Ghana at all. My mama's in Sacramento. That thing, I ain't going nowhere. They're going to have to put me in the grave before I push me out of the country. But I appreciate the freedom of folk who want to leave. Can't take it no more. Everybody got the right to choose. Just lift every voice. Choose for yourself. But if Stevie Wonder's thinking that way, and he got more cash than all of us, you know what I mean? Oh, what's happening inside of his soul? All of that love he still has for humanity, but it begins with Black people and Stevie Wonder. And you all know Stevie's music, right? It's unbelievable. There's nothing like it. It's incredible. It's a whole caravan of love notes. That's what his music is.
We should have played that in the beginning.
No, Coltrane was a good choice. Stevie Wonder's Love Supreme, Coltrane's Love Supreme, Nina Simone, Love Supreme.
Yeah.
Kendrick Lamar got some Love Supreme. Oh yes, Erykah Badu got some. I mean, we got a lot of Love Supreme candidates here. So you chose the right ones. You chose the right one.
Well, Brother West, I just want to thank you. It's such an honor to be speaking with you. Your brilliance is just out of this world. So we thank you from the Black Student Union.
Well, I salute each and every one of you, all the whole student union or all the student body, but especially the three of you all who've come together. And Sister Trinity, she's somewhere though, isn't she? Where's Sister Trinity? Where's her lovely face? Oh, there she is. There she is. Indeed, indeed. Oh, well, we got our dear brother too. We got our dear brother Gabriel here. Brother Gabriel. It's good to see him again. He's been a force for good for a good while.
Thank you, Dr. West.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say thank you myself to you for your time and your message and everything that you had to say. It really touched me, and it really, allowed me to sit and think about some of these things and some of these questions. Now we're gonna move on to Dr. Gabriel for closing remarks.
Wow, just thank you so much, Dr. West, for blessing us with your presence, your powerful message, and your wisdom today. What a way to close out Black History Month. But most importantly, I hope that we continue to have more open and courageous conversations about race, diversity, inclusion, in order to dismantle systemic racism and improve the lives of Black students, students of color, and everyone in this world. I just want to say a few thank yous and acknowledgements. I want to once again really acknowledge our student leaders from the Moorpark College BSU. Gerald, Pauline, Trinity, Corinne, your vision, your leadership to bring Dr. West to our district by working with our sister colleges, Oxnard and Ventura, speaks to your leadership and ability to collaborate and put on such a dynamic event like this. So thank you to our students, and just a few thank yous to the staff, faculty who were involved in supporting our BSU students all year round, especially for helping make this event by supporting them and helping them execute a phenomenal event. So thank you to our staff and faculty as well. But a special thank you to two of their advisors, Miss Benia Sumter, Professor Tammy Coleman, who provide mentorship and leadership. And thank you for being the backbone of our students and believing in them and believing in their vision. And then last but not least, I couldn't say enough thank you to our student leaders and our moderators today. This was student-led, student-facilitated. Gerald, Pauline, Corinne, and Trinity, you're phenomenal leaders.
Wonderful.
And for you to sit in the same space as Dr. West and to be able to do this and engage in the conversation speaks volume to you, who you are, and you as students and as leaders, and for your advocacy for equity and social justice. But once again, thank you, Dr. West. Thank you to the 1,000 plus attendees who are in attendance to hear your words and be blessed by your presence. And we appreciate you being with us today. And hopefully we learned so much from today and that we carried it on to our day-to-day moving forward. So have a great day, everyone. And thank you once again.
Thank you, my dear brother. We thank distinguished Professor Coleman and all the others who facilitate this, and the young people. I'm leaving with joy in my soul and a smile on my face.
Thank you so much, Dr. West.
Dr. West, it's an honor to be here with you.